Yeah. Welcome to the third and last day of Journées Scientifiques Inria Chile 2024, a pre-event of the AI Action Summit. My name is Montserrat Lecaros. I am the Communication Director of Inria Chile, and I will be your host again. Before we start, some safety information in Spanish. En caso de identificar una emergencia, ya sea incendio, movimiento telúrico u otro evento que se activara el sistema de alarma, el personal a cargo del público, la seguridad y la producción y la prevención de riesgo los guiará al punto de encuentro ubicado en la plaza central al inicio del auditorio. La sala 1 cuenta con 2 salidas de emergencias laterales ubicadas en los costados del escenario, una salida de emergencia y una puerta general de ingreso por donde entraron al auditorio. And now we welcome to the chair of the scientific session 3.1 AI for Science, Luis Martí. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, good morning. So for this morning, we will be focusing on AI for Science. It's a very appealing topic, and the keynote of this session will be delivered by Paula Jofré. Paula is the director of the Millennium Nucleus ERIS, Evolutionary Reconstruction of the Interstellar Medium. Is the director of the PhD program on astrophysics in the Universidad Diego Portales, and the research group and the leader of the research group in stellar spectroscopy and Milky Way stellar populations at the Universidad Diego Portales. Well, we have a long-standing, successful collaboration with her. Has an amazing CV. Is, for example, a very high age index and a lot of awards and all of that. And today she's going to be presenting part of very interesting work she's carrying out in Galactic's Phylogenetics. So, Paula, welcome. Thank you for today's presentation. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Luis, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Maybe I can have the other microphone. I have too much light. Hello? Okay. Yes, thank you for inviting me to give this talk here. It's a great pleasure to communicate this idea to you. So as Luis mentioned, I'm an astrophysicist. I work in stellar spectroscopy. My research field is to understand the evolution and the formation of the Milky Way. And I'm not a computer scientist, and I know very little about AI. Everything I know about AI is things that I learned through these kind of collaborations and discussions with the community like this one here. And this talk, I want to present you an idea that at the moment is not being benefited by AI so much, but I think that there is a great potential to move forward and to build with your collaboration. So this idea is called Galactic Phylogenetics, and it's the main idea of this Millennium Nucleus that is finishing this year. So it's over. Well, that's me, but you can see here there is a bunch of other names. So this is a collaboration, and it is an interdisciplinary collaboration, in fact. So what is, oh, you see, that was my, my animation, very, very fast. So what is the principal idea that we're having for galaxy evolution? So we have here a big, beautiful image of what would be a star formation zone. It's a molecular gas, so there is a lot of gas and there is a lot of dust here, and when it cools down, it condenses and forms stars. So stars are formed in groups. When we see a star here, we know this star didn't form alone, it formed in a big group of stars. So initially, well, sorry, but my other slides didn't have all of this in one go. Initially, you have one generation of stars that is formed from this gas, and then there is a distribution of stars. Some stars are small and some stars are big, because when this material condenses, it forms stars of all sorts of masses. And the big stars, they evolve faster than the small stars. The big stars are more efficient in burning their fuel, and they die much faster and much quicker than what would be the small stars of a generation. And it turns out that inside the stars, they shine because inside they are going through the process of nucleosynthesis, so they are transforming light elements into heavy elements. So actually all the elements we know, everything that builds everywhere, is produced inside stars through this nucleosynthetic process. So the big stars, once they die, as maybe some of you know, they die kind of catastrophically through a supernova event, most of them, so they explode. And what happens? The material, it's kind of brought back to this interstellar medium or to this molecular cloud, the gas cloud. And because inside they were building these elements, these heavier elements that were not there before, once this material is ejected back into the interstellar medium, this interstellar medium, the chemistry of the medium is modified. So, and then a new generation of stars is going to form, which is these yellow ones here, again, having a variety of masses, but you can see that the color of these ones is different than the initial one, because now the chemical composition of this new gas or these new stars have been modified. So there is a kind of process of chemical evolution that is driven by these stars. The stars are formed, they cook their chemical elements inside, then they die, they explode, this new material, this new composition is donated back to the universe, a new generation of stars is formed with a modified chemistry compared to the previous one. But then there are also these little stars. They, at some point, they'll die, but they need a long time to do that. So the low mass stars, and stars like a slightly 80% the mass of the sun, they need so much time to die that the first ones that were formed in the universe, they are still around. Which means that if we have a lot of these low mass stars, and the low mass stars are like the sun, we can trace back how was the conditions of this gas at the time of when these stars were formed, and like this we can then reconstruct the history or the chemical evolution history of a galaxy like the Milky Way. And it turns out that we have billions of stars. So we can do this for huge data sets. And we can do, we have a lot of information about all these stars. And in fact, in the Milky Way science, we have so much data because we have, as I said, 1 billion stars to analyze. So how does it work with these metals? As I said, they are formed inside the stars. And when a stellar generation forms, there is a distribution of masses. And then there is a quantity here. This is the typical initial mass function, which is something also that we would like to parameterize and understand because we don't really know whether it is uniform across all the times and the universes, but empirically it seems that it's quite uniform. So stars form with all these different masses in one star formation event from one of these molecular clouds. The more massive ones, as I said, they die very quickly. They explode in this supernova type 2. This is the classical nebula from the Crab Nebula. And they produce certain elements like oxygen, calcium, magnesium, silicon, which are the elements that are produced inside these very massive stars. As time passes, because this is like a relation with time, this die faster than this one. So as time passes, then there is the second kind of supernova that is of these intermediate mass stars, which are the supernova type 1a, which produce other kind of elements, mostly, no? Iron, nickel, manganese, vanadium, and those that are in the iron peak of the periodic table. And then as time keeps passing, then the intermediate mass stars, they will start dying. They don't die as a supernova, actually. They, at the end of their lifetime, they pulsate, so they produce a lot of wind, so they are not so spectacular, but they do produce the very heavy elements and also the very light ones. So carbon, nitrogen, and then all the very, very, very heavy elements. Here put yttrium, barium, but then there are other ones like lead and all of them that have a mass above 80, or atomic number above 80. And then we have the little ones, right? Those ones that haven't exploded or haven't died yet, that are alive, and they are still there. And we can analyze them, and then we can know the chemistry of the gas at the moment that this generation was formed. This is a periodic table, colored not by the typical chemical colors, which is like the properties of the elements, but this is colored by how these elements are formed and evolve. You can see that they have more than one color. So the previous slide showed you very simplistic how these elements are formed, but it's not so simple. There is a combination. So massive stars or this white dwarf, which are the intermediate massive stars exploding, they produce, for example, manganese, but other stars may also produce a little bit of manganese. So the idea is to collect data for as many low mass stars as possible and collect and measure these chemical abundances for as many of them, because like this we can disentangle all these various processes, because for each stellar generation, there are different time scales of the different stars that are producing a different amount, all these chemical elements, and then when you integrate that over time, then you have also the various generations kind of on top of each other contributing. So it's a very, very complicated process, and we have only these elements to really disentangle all these processes. And we do that, right? We have 1 billion stars from Gaia. One of the main motivations was to do this kind of stuff. There is an industry of spectroscopic surveys that are taking the spectra, which allow us to measure all these chemical elements. We have, at the moment, the ongoing surveys. They are getting into the 100,000 or 500,000 spectra for individual stars. But now we are moving into the next generation, Foremost and WEAVE and SDSS-5, and there is another one in Hawaii, and that are going to give us more than 1 million spectra. So we're doing that because we think that really these low mass stars are the fossil record that essentially share the history of this molecular gas cloud that is evolving through time in the galaxy. So when you look at the sky, in a dark night, and you see all these stars, imagine that these are really fossil, they have fossil information about the past. So these are not the living things, these are the dead things, because they stay there forever and ever, having this information about their origin, and we can use it to reconstruct the history of the Milky Way. And then what we do in our field is to make ourselves these questions. Which older stellar populations were responsible for the chemical pattern that I have in a younger star? I can also make myself the question of which are the from which fossil records I can explain the chemical composition of a given star. There are the very first stars that exploded, and they are responsible for the chemistry of the second stars. And the first stars are important because before that, there were no chemical elements, right? So there are many questions about the nature of these very first stars because we have not found until now any star that has 0 metals. So somehow they were different to the stars of today. But the important thing that I want to here motivate is that these kind of questions are not unique to this field. These questions are classical questions in many other evolutionary studies. One takes data from today, and we're trying to explain what happened in the past that may explain the data today. And that's the main motivation of this project. This is why we call it evolutionary reconstruction of the interstellar medium. The interstellar medium is this gas cloud that is evolving, and the stars are the fossil records of this gas cloud. And then the hypothesis is that if the chemical pattern of the low mass stars is the fossil record of the birth interstellar medium, and if we have many fossils and we can reconstruct the history of the evolution of the Milky Way, what we have is a standard evolutionary problem. And if we have an evolutionary problem, then we can start thinking which other evolutionary problems are out there that we can use to solve our problem. So what do we have in common with other evolutionary studies? And that's the theory of descent with modification of Darwin. So Darwin had said that there must be some information that is transmitted from one generation to the next one. And for evolution to happen, the change needs to happen, right? So if from one generation to the other there is no modification, then there is nothing evolving, and everything remains constant, right? So for evolution to take place, there needs to be change. And for us to be able to reconstruct this evolution backwards, this change has to be an inheritance change. It cannot be some random thing that has nothing to do with the other. So the important is that with these small changes, they accumulate over time, and then we have a diversification. In our case, we have identified what is being the process that is driving this descent with modification, and as I said initially, that's the nucleosynthesis. This is the chemical production of new elements inside the stars that then die and bring it back to the interstellar medium. So that's us. These are the PIs of this nucleomillennium. Me, Patricia Tisera from Universidad Católica. She runs numerical models of galaxy evolution. Álvaro Rojas from USACH. He works like me in spectroscopy of low mass stars. And Evelyn Johnston, who studies composite stellar populations in other galaxies, and she's also at UDP with me. So this is probably like a slide that I have had to put many times when I explain this to astrophysicists, because they get a little bit skeptical about this, because they don't understand that we are essentially doing similar things to biologists. This is a very, very nice book written by Lyndell Brohoman in Australia about molecular phylogenetics, and the similarities, or kind of why I think that this is we have a lot of things here in common, is in white here it's written the fundamentals of evolutionary biology. And evolutionary biology essentially works to connect the changes in all these individual genomes to a population level and then to a generation of explaining the diversity. And what we do in galaxy evolution is to connect these changes in the stellar abundances of individual stars, try to connect it to star formation histories, and then to how galaxies are assembled. And then the information of all these 3 levels is available in the genome, the DNA. In our case, the information of all these levels is available in the chemical abundances. And what people do when they extract information from the DNA, or what they want to do in their field, is to identify strange individuals or different individuals, understand how are the interactions, understand the evolution and the impact of the important historical events that may produce a different kind of change, tracing the origin of various lineages, and investigating the tempo and the mode of the evolution in all time scales. And that's what we try to do when we want to understand and study the evolution of the Milky Way. So coming back to astronomy, this is I would say, a summary of the state of the art when we want to study chemical evolution. Of course, we try to compare models with data. That's what we do in science. And the model parameters that we want to fix are this initial mass function, how, when a star generation is formed, how is the distribution of masses. We want to understand the production of the elements, which we call yields, because this is also a model, how the stars make inside their chemical elements and how they eject them into the interstellar medium. We want to understand the star formation rate, how often can we form stars in a molecular cloud. We want to understand the feedback mechanism, because when a star explodes, it heats up this gas and it pushes away, so it produces some level of feedback that we need to model and understand. Then there are the time delay, because there are these various time scales depending on the various stars that are exploding. Stars actually, and then when they explode and they donate this material back into the interstellar medium, they mix, and it is not instantaneous and it is not homogeneous, of course. And, stars rotate, that causes some extra amount of complexity, particularly the more massive stars. So there is all these models that have to be parameterized in these galaxy evolution models that we want to constrain. And for that, we use, obviously, data. But data is not free of uncertainties. When we analyze a spectrum, we analyze spectral lines. We have to choose how to parameterize these spectral lines. We have a resolution in the spectra, which may also be responsible for uncertainties. There is noise, and then we have some other models when we try to extract the information that are related to the atmosphere model of the star and how the light goes out from the center of the star towards our telescope. And there is also one other issue, that the stars are very annoying because they live for a long time and they don't live where they were born. They tend to migrate. So when you take the data in a given place, you have to consider that the star is not born from there. You have to try to bring it back to when it was formed, and that's not so simple. But what people do in my field is to make a plot like this. Every element, these are the heavy elements, every element in a different panel, all these things here are data, measurements of, they have different colors, so you can see some are gray, some are black, some are triangles, circles. That shows that this data is coming from various sources, individual astronomers going to observe and measure a specific element, publishing it, someone making a recopilation of all of that. And then these lines are the the evolution based on various, in this case, yields, these things here. So how the different yields, depending on various assumptions, may evolve. And what I want to show through this plot is that this is a very heavy plot, right? You need to be an expert working on that stuff for many years, and even I struggle to interpret a plot like this because it's quite dense of information, and I think that there is even more information. For example, we don't know the ages of the stars here, or we don't know their birthplaces. And if you add that information here, you would have to add extra colors or color maps that would make this plot even heavier. So it's very difficult to reach a lot of conclusions from this plot. And I think that in that sense, in a way to make forward with chemical evolution, we can think about other ways of visualizing the data and analyzing it. And I think that that's a big challenge because we are going to get even more data. And I don't think that more data is going to solve a fundamental problem like how are we going to visualize this data in order for us to compare the models with the data given the amount of information and parameters we have. So yeah, coming back to evolutionary biology, they have done cool stuff for over hundreds of years already. And they have been doing themselves the questions that we are doing, and we can learn from them. So the metal yields are responsible for the descent with modification. And if we go back to Darwin, we understand that the heredity, which is the responsible for descent with the modification, as he said, there is some information that is passed and modified from generation to generation. And these generations can be visualized in the famous tree of life. And this is because every organism on the planet is connected because they share the same information, the same evolutionary information. Darwin didn't know what was it, actually. He just understood that there was an information that was shared among everyone. And in a galaxy, or in the universe, the information that is shared in terms of evolution is the chemistry, we know. So, in principle, we can make a tree of the universe, right? So what about a tree of stars? And that's the question that we made ourselves now, kind of 8 years ago. This is how we think that a tree of stars should look like. We have here a cloud that is forming the stars. This is the more massive stars that will explode and will create a new generation of stars. So if we observe this cloud in time 4, we have the low mass stars here that are producing some branches, and then these other new stars that are from here, another branch. That's a PhD thesis, the first PhD thesis working on this topic, actually, finished in 2022. Yeah, it's a whole keynote PowerPoint, remove some text. Yeah, so the important thing is that these branching diagrams are a logical way to represent hierarchical structure. They are very natural, and we can use them here because we are having because the change with time of these chemical elements is also happening slowly and should, in a way, ramify as it does in these cases here. And the cool thing is that Darwin, by understanding that these differences are connected through heredity, this hierarchical nature and this hierarchical structure not only allows us to visualize, but also to explain the data. And I don't remember what was written there. Oh, okay. So when we want to do this reconstruction, we have been learning a bunch of obvious things, but because I am not a biologist either, I had to learn this stuff, and I have to explain that to people that are not biologists, particularly astronomers. But the important thing is that one of the main challenges in evolutionary studies is the amount of trees that are possible when you have a data set. So only with 51 sequences or 51, I don't know, data sets, whatever, they can have 10 to the, I don't remember the number, but I think it's 56 number of particle possibilities. So it's larger than the number of particles in the universe. We have, as I said, millions of stars. So if we are going to make a tree out of millions of stars, it's just infinite amount of possible trees that we can build. And how do we pick? How do we know which is the right one? How do we know which tree is going to explain the best, is going to be the best representation of the history? So that's a problem, and in evolutionary biology, there's been a lot of models, a lot of assumptions, a lot of methods to navigate through this huge range of possibilities and narrow it down such that then they can estimate with some level of certainty which of the trees would be more a better representation of the data in terms of the historical relation, I don't know, scenario. There are things that I find particularly difficult to well, not that, yeah, I mean, deal with, which are the fact that when you have a tree structure and if you rotate these nodes, there is still the same topology. So I find it like a little bit difficult sometimes to compare or how to explain a computer that these two trees are the same when the order changes. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And then there is also where you put the root when you want to reconstruct a history. At some point you need to say this is the first. And you put the first here or the first here, and then you can have different ways of interpreting this, which can lead you to different conclusions about the history. So how to put roots, there are a bunch of papers, all applied obviously to a biological case, and we need to go through them and see how can we adapt it to our case. There are, here it said also, other challenges that are more fundamental. The first, it's all in other places. So the first one is that we know, I mean, in biology, people have been learning that the information is not only passed from one generation to the other, like in time, and then you replicate and you make a tree, but you can also have information that is cross within a same generation. This is horizontal gene transfer, and it happens a lot in viruses, and people are now, I don't know, learning about that. That's kind of, in a way, some level of state of the art. So that means that the trees have this you can have one node that doesn't go into two, but this node also receives information from two previous nodes. So that shows, that looks more like a network and less than a tree. And understanding that galaxies evolve in a very complicated way in which they interact a lot, and as I said initially, stars like to migrate and go somewhere else to do the life, and maybe they even manage to move and explode somewhere else. We don't think that we can ever find a tree of the universe, because it should be rather a network. So we have now a much more complicated diagram that we need to characterize. There is also the fact that I have needed some time to understand that I thought I was doing things wrong, but now I know I am not doing so many things wrong, but genes also have different time scales to evolve. Some of them do it very fast, others do it very slow. And trees made out of different genes are going to be conflictive to each other. They are not going to look the same. So there is a way to see kind of the general tree, but one has to consider that depending on the gene that is used, the trees are going to also show a different history, because they are evolving and responding to different stimulus, in a way. And just putting back here the periodic table of the beginning, the chemical elements are also responding differently. So if my data is incomplete and I have only one set of elements, or I have another set of elements, I wanted for many years to get to the same result, to say my results are robust. But I was finding that the trees were very different to each other, and I thought, this is not going to work. Until I understood that, of course, if I am taking these elements or these other elements, it is great if I find different trees of the same data, because then I am looking at different processes. So that's great. Okay, so that was the introduction of the idea, and I can tell you a little bit what we've been doing, because that's just how we have been learning. But where are we with in astronomy? So all the books, I'm sorry, Keynote and PowerPoint are not so good friends, unfortunately. Okay, I don't remember what was written here. Yeah, I think that here, it's up there, it's black. So one thing is that we don't have a model for galaxy evolution. because this is a new thing, no one has done it before, so we have no model. We go to a way of making trees which is from the 80s, relatively old, but it's efficient, it's fast, and it's works on this distance matrix. So you put all the stars in a matrix, and then you calculate the distances of your data, and you can do an Euclidean distance or Manhattan distance, or we are thinking about other distances. And this is, and then one can make a tree using this very old algorithm, which is very fast and very efficient and very straightforward in a way, which is called the neighbor joining algorithm. So essentially, it will put together the nodes that are more similar to each other according to this distance matrix. So using this is what we have been doing so far, because it doesn't assume anything, and it's fast, and it's very applicable to continuous data. There is the other thing that a lot of these tree building methods are very optimized to work with DNA data, which had all these letters, and they are very extended, and we have these measurements of abundances. So we need to also look for methods that are working on continuous data, until we build our own methods, of course. But yeah, we haven't managed to go to have our own methods until now, but we're working on it. So looking on the real data, that's again Keegan for his PhD thesis. He took a sample of stars, it's 400 stars, all of them is in the solar neighborhood, very close to us. They are all very well measured. We know the ages and we know the chemistry very well. So we can attribute the differences in the chemistry to some kind of real difference and not some systematic difference. And he made this tree, okay? The tree, you can see that it has several branches. And I asked him to calculate the gradient or the slope of these gradients. This is the metallicity, the overall metal content, and the age. To find that all of these branches have a different slope, okay, in this age metallicity relation. And the age metallicity relation shows somehow the rate of enrichment. So that means that this branch here had a slower rate of enrichment than this one here, which has it faster. So we have 400 stars in the solar neighborhood, and we find 4 branches. How do we explain that we don't have only one branch of, one big family, but instead we have these 4 families, and each of them somehow managing to enrich themselves at different time scales or at different rates. So we think that this is because, as I have said, the stars move out from where they come from, which means that we have various groups of stars here, but they didn't form here. So they have migrated here, and then they are now in all these various branches. So that was the main result of Keegan. Then we went to look at these big surveys, because we want to do this in the big surveys, the big data set, and not these individual studies of people that go to observe in the observatories. So the one big survey is Galactic. It's a survey from Australia that we have been working a lot, and that's the work that Kurt was working on. He, in 2 weeks, I'm going to go to the ceremony. He got highlighted for his thesis at the Universidad de Chile because of this work, so I'm very proud. And what he did first was he started making trees, and we realized that I did it before he came, actually, so that was his project, to improve the abundances. This is one thing we did with machine learning. This was the original planes of the abundances in these contours of all the elements we had, but we know about several methods that can help us to improve the precision thanks to machine learning, neural networks, or some other models that can be trained such that then you can reduce the systematic and the random uncertainties of your data. So that's what we did with all these abundances, and like this we could make trees that were better because we had much more precise abundances than the original data set. So this is the new tree, this was the old tree, the branches are shorter, it is better supported in general, and we're finding groups that somehow we can associate to things we know. So yeah, the differences of or the location of the stars in the branches is not exactly the same. Here they are cleaner somehow, and as I said, the branches are a bit shorter. That says that the tree is more robust than with the more uncertain data, of course. And we found that these groups, one of them was very much inconsistent with a group that was found by another group independently of a relationship between this chemical ratio, which somehow plays with the tempo of the production of these elements and the age. Now, whether this is a coincidence or not, we don't know. I think that we have to keep working on it, but the important thing is that the groups that were found with this more uncertain data set could be anything. That's another work. Sara Vitali, another student of my group, and she looked at the same relation, age versus relation on another set of stars. This other set of stars had very good ages, and it was like various in the solar neighborhood as well, but we had a wider range of overall metal content. And one can see that the relationship of this ratio with age changes according to this metal content. This is telling us, this is a kind of evidence that migration is happening. So stars are moving around, and the star we are observing today here is not coming from here, must be coming from somewhere else. So that's a big challenge also in trying to reconstruct the history, because you first have to put the stars back from where they come from. Again, maybe you know that face, Theo, a student that we are working together with Inria. And what Theo did to contribute into this topic was to look at open clusters. Open clusters are the group of stars that was formed in this generation from the cloud that is still together. Because, as I said at the beginning, stars are forming generations, and then the Loma stars will stay there in the generation, but as the stars move around, because they migrate and they rotate in the Milky Way, they end up leaving the cluster. So the cluster somehow evaporates. So we can ask ourselves two questions. The first one is, can we, if we have a chemical pattern of a star, can I then bring it back to its birthplace, given that now it is traveling around? Can I bring it back to its birthplace using the chemistry only? And secondly, how similar are the chemical measurements of a cluster that we know that this cluster was formed from the same cloud? So how different are the chemistry of stars of different clusters, and how similar are the measurements of stars of the same cluster? So that's what we did here. We looked at 100 clusters, and also we looked at stars in the field, and we looked at 15 abundances from a project, from another survey that is called Apogee. And the idea was to train a machine to tell us, you are part of the cluster, you are not part of the cluster. So this is the set of clusters, and that's kind of the uncertainty of the measurements. And at the end, the conclusion was that we can know to 80% of precision. We can classify somehow the stars to their cluster with no more than about 80% of precision. And we can also not know with better than about 70 to 65%. Assign the star to their given cluster. Sorry if I confused myself. But the question is that the kind of take-home message is that with the current data we have today, we cannot know for absolute certainty if this star belongs to that cluster, and also the clusters are slightly too similar to each other for us to be able to distinguish one star formation event from the other. So this is not very good news, but this study in a way confirms or supports other conclusions that have been done in the field about that. So the challenges using data is that on one hand, we have these stars that are coming from the same cloud, which are these sibling stars, and they will be in separate tips in this very simple neighbor joining trees we're using. Grouping sibling stars using the chemistry alone is not so easy. There is an uncertainty associated because the abundances are uncertain and because they are somehow quite similar to each other. So that's also tricky. Radial migration moves things around, and then galaxies also mix and merge, which may destroy this tree-like evolutionary history. And of course, we don't really know how many elements and what is the precision we need for us to improve in that, because 70% is what we can do so far. And of course, we have no model yet. So without a model, we're still a little bit blind and empirically trying to do these things. So how do we move forward? Using simulations. This is what Patricia is doing. We need to now make a break from the millions of data we have with all the uncertainties and all the cool stuff about maps of the Milky Way. And we need to make one step behind and go to numerical simulations, which are obviously have their own uncertainties because they don't replicate the reality, but at least we know what's happening because we have built these histories. So that's the work that another student in our group did, Daniele. Here it says that she, on next Wednesday, I'm going to the ceremony because she got the best PhD of this year from the National Academy of Sciences through this project. And she looked at the galaxy in isolation. And we had, we had all these elements. And it was a galaxy that didn't interact and evolved there quietly, didn't have any problem, nothing special, very boring. She struggled because she wanted to do something much more fun than look at this boring galaxy, but now she's happy that she got a prize for looking at the boring fake galaxy. So we wanted to know whether these trees that we were measuring have information, right? Like you do it in the data, you obtain a tree, and then you can interpret as you wish. But we wanted to know that we were really measuring some information that was not random, okay? This is how a random tree would look like. This is how the tree of the galaxy looks like. So they are different. And there is some signal here that we can use to understand what's happening with the evolution and the chemical evolution of a given galaxy. So that was a good new, very silly test to do, but no one had done it before. And we started doubting that we were probably just, concluding from randomness. So the galaxy is a big simulated galaxy. It has spiral arms. It's a disk, beautiful. And we could look at we looked at 4 different regions to see also if these trees were going to be different, because each of these regions have a different star formation history, because there is various levels of material forming stars in these different regions. So there are these groups. All of them look just one branch. That is, in a way, expected because this galaxy didn't interact. The particles have stayed there, more or less. So it's expected that they will look like that, with a nice ranking with age, youngest here, oldest here. And the length of these trees is different depending on where you are. So we can, in a way, associate the length of a tree with the star formation efficiency. Inside, which is the longest tree, inside we have more gas, so the galaxy was able to make more stars, and the more stars you make, the more chemical elements you do. So that's why the tree becomes longer. So we can use the tree length to constrain, for example, star formation efficiency, which is something we would like to be doing with the data we have. So to finish, from the simulation, we are working on other projects, but they are not quite there yet. We really don't know how much information is in the chemistry. The processes are very complicated, and we don't know if we have enough information, even if we didn't have errors. So that's one thing that we want to understand. We're struggling to compare trees. The simulations have also a lot of particles. And as I said, it's not about making a tree of 100,000 particles. We have to break it down somehow, and we are struggling to do that. We have to move to networks. We know trees are not a good representation of what's ongoing. And we have to think about how to compare models with data. So we have been thinking about making scenarios from the galaxies that we have simulated and built all these trees and see how can we compare them with data. But the current methods that we are more comfortable with, I would say, they go to the tips and they associate the tips, and it needs to be always the same object in order to compare these trees. And I don't care about what object I'm talking about. I want to be able to compare the whole tree structure in a way and find ways that I can compare structures. But considering that all these nodes changes, and I am not a computer scientist, so that's why I'm also projecting these ideas and these thoughts to you. And if you think that you can provide with some help in how to do this kind of, solve this kind of issues, I would be very happy to discuss that. So I finish. I finish here. This is us. Just take home messages. The stars are the fossil record that share the history of the Milky Way. Phylogenetics not only describe the hierarchical structure, but provide an explanation. This is a cross-disciplinary work. We have people from mathematics, people from biology, from astrophysics working here. There is a huge range of questions that can be addressed. Everything I show here is the work done by young people, the students. So it's a nice opportunity for students to do things. And just my last message, because this is how I feel right now. Although it's very cool, I hope that you found cool what I just said. We have 8 years working on this, and we have published 4 papers. It's not much. So interdisciplinary work, an unknown territory, it means that we are doing many more mistakes than in a standard work. A lot of things we simply don't know, and we have to try, and they don't work. So it's very difficult to publish, and we are living in a world in which everyone wants a lot of papers, everyone wants the immediate result, so it's very hard to fund. So I'm still in a kind of, I'm very sad because this project is over. They didn't give us the continuation. They have punished us because we didn't publish enough, but how can we publish when we're making something from scratch? So I think that and you are a computer scientist, so you're working in all sorts of disciplines. And interdisciplinary is hard. I mean, to understand the problem from the ground is difficult because you have to consider so many things you don't know. And although it sounds cool, I think that we're facing a problem with the funding agencies that they really want quick results, and we need to understand, and we need to, I don't know, be honest about it and try as scientists to propagate a little bit this thing that sometimes the world needs to be a little bit more patient, right? The 2 papers we managed got prizes, so they are good works, right? But they need more time, so that's life. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Okay. Now, well, thank you, Paula. It's a very interesting topic. I don't know, it's a fantasy of anybody working in this area. You know, I love the idea that your scale of time is giga-years, no? So I can be late because I am 2 giga-years. So, by the way, this is a problem, what you were mentioning at the end is a problem that we share everywhere, and in computer science and in AI in particular, is like living in a washing machine, you know, everything changes every 3 months. It's very hard to stay focused and to bet on an idea. So, I don't know, welcome to, there is a very nice paper on how to handle depression in artificial intelligence. Some people say, well, because they say, of course, it's a feeling that a lot of people are experiencing. But well, going back to your presentation, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. Kartik?
Great. Thank you, Paula, for the wonderful talk. I have maybe a slightly, because from a computer scientist perspective, so I was trying to understand some of the things. So do I get it right that when you're building your trees, you're kind of taking all the information you get from the stars, and when you're, let's say, connecting two stars with an edge in your tree, is the chemical composition of these stars that is being used? So now I'm thinking, okay, instead of maybe using directly the chemical composition, can we imagine, taking all the features that you get, chemical composition and maybe other measurements, the life of the star, etc., and to kind of transform it into an embedding space? So imagine taking all the star information and then moving it to an embedding space where perhaps the links become more apparent or more difficult. So essentially learning this instead of only using, the information that you have, but maybe learning a function that transforms this information into a new space. Is that something that you have thought about?
I mean, yes, certainly, because there is also this, I think that you have to, in a way, have a data set that is very homogeneous. And say, for example, you want to compare models with data, right? So you will have some predicted abundances, which, by the way, are not going to be the stellar abundance we measure. These are in mass budget because in the simulations, they just produce a certain amount of element. We cannot, when we observe it, we cannot go and measure and weight the stars. So it's an abundance ratio. So how to compare models with data, I think that then something like that will become very important because the scales are going to be different, but the information is going to be there. I think, however, I mean, one thing that I have been trying to maybe a little bit conservative at this stage, because I think we need to be a little bit ahead in our understanding than in our method. I would be careful about what kind of information I would put in this embedded space, because I want to be sure that the information is inherited. So if I put the positions, or if I put the age, or if I put the color of the star, of course, that's very important information. We have realized, particularly in this work with Theo about the clusters, if you put the age of the cluster, of course you have more information, right? Because of all the degeneracies that are happening, you may find stars that have the same chemistry but have different ages, because they form in different places and then they are all together here. So age is an excellent degeneracy breaker, but you don't inherit age. Right? It's something you have, right? So I am at the moment, I would like to use the age as a validation more than something that you put, for example, in this space. But certainly, it's a very good point for what we want to do, which is to have a set of, a training set from models, and then we want to apply that to data, and the abundance, the information of the chemistry is there, but the format and the scale is different, and something like that is probably the way to go. Yeah.
Thanks. Here, well, just to comment, because I had a similar question, and it's very interesting how to translate this problem into like the tools and the things we do. For example, this looks a lot like a privacy-related problem, no? That you need to eliminate information that is a strong indicator of identity. In this case, I don't know, the age of a cluster, and it still have a valid representation. Probably one way would be to put all the information and try to identify what are these similar, that in another domain will be like generating a privacy issue, like the ID of the person or something like that. Because, we were thinking the same, we need an embedding that has enough information so we can do this grouping. And the problem is that if there is any other information that we can use besides the chemical composition, that is still, let's say, preserve the quality of the information that you have. But then this is your answer is no.
I want to stick to the kind of equivalent to the DNA, right? And that is the information that is passed. All the other information is just coincidental, right? Like it's not. Well, I mean, there are these kind of geographic stuff as well. So there is this relation of individuals that are in a certain region are going to be more similar than the other ones because the information is passed closer. So probably space is something that one could use too.
Yes, or maybe some sort of not, let's say, I mean, the universe is impossible to say precise, but make it relative to other elements, not a given area of the universe, but or the galaxy, but to say this, how far it is from other stuff, not like in a relative way. Not, I know that in the universe everything is relative, but I don't know. It's a very interesting topic.
A lot to do.
Do we have any other questions? This is going to be about modeling. I have the intuition.
Hi, thanks you for your talk. I find very interesting the mix between biology and astronomy. And I am working on like adaptive dynamics in ecology. So I was wondering if in your group, for example, you think in other links between biology and astronomy, for example, evolutionary games or adaptive dynamics, that is the continuous way of seeing that, and think, I don't know, for example, a fitness in a star in the ESM. So I was wondering if in your group you're making other questions to find, I don't know, the phylogenetic model for stars.
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, I'm still moving in my comfort zone, which is astrophysics. So I know very well the impact in astrophysics. I don't know very well the impact in biology, but we are making a phylogenetic network model for galaxy evolution. This is being led by Sha Hua in Australia. She's a biologist, actually, a mathematician. She thinks that this model can also have a great contribution to kind of how to model more complex systems. I mean, she works, for example, with the evolution of languages. So not only with the evolution of species, right? So they also are kind of different. So I think that kind of the biologists can tell you better how they see these kind of new tools could have an impact in the field of biology. But it's true that what Shah says is that this situation we have here is in many ways because of all the mixing we have of gases and clouds and galaxies merging and migration. The tree-like structure is so destroyed that it offers a kind of much more complex opportunity to model an evolutionary history that you cannot find here. But then we have the advantage, which in biology is not there, which is like that we kind of know how chemical elements are produced, and we have the prior that in every next generation there's going to be more elements. A star is not going to eat the element. So the DNA can move in many directions, how the modifications happen. So that adds a big uncertainty in making evolutionary models in biology, for example. And I guess that the languages also don't have a preferred way of evolving, but chemical elements have a preferred way of evolving, which is to increase with time. So that helps somehow. The problem is that our data is much smaller, and what is happening is also very, very complicated, yeah.
Thanks. Do we have any other question? We have, but as the streaming question gets to my hands, I want to build on top of Matías' question because I think he was referring, I don't know if it makes sense, but because in biology you have, let's say, the species exist because they are, or new species come up because they adapt to the environment. They have this concept of fitness, no? And of course, like if one star goes one way or another because maybe it can be viewed as it's adapting to the context in which. So incorporating this into the simulation, I don't know. I think it was part of your question, no? I don't know if I understood it right, but.
I mean, I think that this is one of the ways for a species to survive. but it could be also just chance. As I have genetic drift is like it happened or it doesn't, right?
Yes.
On the other hand, for a new generation of stars to form, there needs to be some level of fitness because you have to have a gas in certain conditions. So you may go and explode somewhere. And if there is not enough gas, there's not going to be new stars being formed there. So it's how you define fitness, right? Like we can define a sort of fitness also in galaxy evolution. We need to have certain conditions, which we know, for new stars to form and for the evolution to keep happening. If not, then you will have the stars there, the low mass ones that will stay there, and that will be it, right? So you will also have lineages that will go extinct in a way. And you can define the fitness in a slightly different way. And I don't know how would you define, for example, the fitness in a language. You need to have a critical mass of people talking for this language to stay alive, for example. The language...
You know, this is what the concept of meme that we use all the time now, this meme, actually comes from evolutionary theory. This guy, Dawkins, in the 70s, that he had the idea that ideas were like a sort of creature that wanted to, let's say, had the, not want because they don't have will, but they try to live in many heads, no? And be spread in the same way a biological entity would. So it's actually like languages are sort of this. Can you unlock your things? So we have a question from Rodrigo Vargas, and he says, considering the uncertainties in neurosynthesis, such as interactions with black holes and potential discrepancies between observed abundances and those predicted by the theoretical periodic table, how does this affect the accuracy of phylogenetic trees? Thanks, and very cool. All.
Well, that's the point, right? There are a lot of uncertainties that are involved in this thing. But, I mean, we are building huge instruments and spending a huge amount of money to collect millions of stars and measure millions of spectra times 20, because it's about 20 chemical elements that have been measured. There is a huge investment in improving the pipelines to analyze this data, and this is just the beginning, right? So this hypothesis that the chemical pattern of low-mass stars is having some information about its birthplace, and with that we can reconstruct how the Milky Way evolved, and understanding that the Milky Way is just a normal galaxy in the universe, how other galaxies evolve. It's a huge field in astrophysics at the moment. So we are here trying to use this method of the phylogenetics to visualize and to analyze the data in a different way. But we need to, handling these uncertainties is not only a problem we have to deal with, but that's a problem that is driving the science, right? We want to see how these various sources of uncertainty, I mean, it's an uncertainty, you can call it, or you can call it like an unknown. For example, even these low-mass stars, the chemistry doesn't stay constant over time because the star still has a gravity and it's a gas of very light elements, and the atmosphere, all these elements are heavier because iron is obviously much heavier than hydrogen. So iron will sink with time, and the star is living 8 gigayears. So iron goes down slowly as the star exists. We have to correct that back, right? It's an uncertainty, but on the other hand, it's the process of diffusion, it's the process of stellar evolution, so there is another research field that gets to play a role in us to understand better that detail, for example. So all these uncertainties are details, and each of these details is associated to an interesting scientific question, I say.
Thanks. You just used the word diffusion, and I had the question when you use your simulations, what kind of, let's say, mathematical entity is it? It is like a set of partial differential equations, or what is because for us it would be like a good starting point to see an area of collaboration.
Yeah, I don't know these equations. These are the codes, but this is magnetohydrodynamics, so there are some partial equations there. And yeah, the diffusion of how the elements are propagated. Yeah, this is some.
Because some of the, actually, and today afternoon we have a whole session dedicated to this, hybridization between models and data, you know, this physics-informed machine learning that now is very trendy. Also, in the morning, we have Francisco that is working on this. And it could be a good starting point because all of these methods are trying, or some of these methods are trying to merge machine learning, like learning from data, instances, and learning from the model. So you could ground this simulation into something more realistic, but using the equations to fill the gap when you don't have information. So maybe it could be like, I don't know, I would love to be involved in a prize eventually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. We continue now with the presentation by Itziar De Gregorio-Monsalvo. Itziar is the Deputy Representative of the European Southern Observatory, ESO, in Chile. Before she served as the head of the ESO Office of Science in Chile and led the ALMA Science Program Management Group. She has a PhD from the National Institute of Aerospace Technology in Spain. So and she used NASA antennas to conduct radio astronomy observations and study star formation processes. So, well, this is another, let's say, another take at space from a different perspective. So welcome, Itziar. Thank you for accepting, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for this nice invitation. I'm going to talk about the European Southern Observatory, who we are and what we do here, and how artificial intelligence can help us into future operations. Well, the mission of ESO is to design, to build, and to operate advanced ground-based astronomical telescopes. And we also focus into fostering international collaboration for astronomy. We are composed by 16 member states, all from Europe right now. It was founded in the 60s by 5 states that you can see there highlighted in blue. And well, Australia is our strategical partner. We hope will become a member very soon. And all of our telescopes are located in Chile. Chile is the host country. But why do we selected Chile for putting all our telescopes? This is because of the natural conditions that Chile has. Okay, we have on one side this Humboldt stream from Antarctica that produces very low clouds and very calm wind. And then we have this coast change of mountains that blocks, you know, the entry of these clouds into inside. And then on the other side, we have Andes mountains. And the Andes block all the clouds from the other side from the continent. So this is what we have. It's a very nice picture. And there is the location of all our telescopes near San Pedro de Atacama and in Antofagasta and also in the southern, near La Serena. Okay? So this is exactly the places where we have all these telescopes. One is the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Llano Chagnantor. Then we have close to Antofagasta, Paranal observatories, and we are building in Cerro Armazones, the ELT. Okay. And then we have the first one, La Silla, near La Serena. La Silla was the first observatory at ISO, and right now we still operate 2 telescopes. They are not that big, approximately 3-point-something meters, but they produce excellent science because it's not only, what matters is not only the telescope itself, but also the instruments we attach to the telescopes. The instruments are like our eyes in the past, okay? And what we do is to build all the time new generation instruments that are attached to these old-fashioned telescopes and produce really good science. I think everybody knows Maria Teresa Ruiz. She's a very famous astronomer, and she managed to discover the first brown dwarf. Brown dwarfs are objects in between planets and stars, and she did it with this telescope. But not only that, with these 2 telescopes, these 2 Nobel Prizes got plenty of data to receive this Nobel Prize, in particular the accelerated expansion of universe in 2011, and also there was another Nobel Prize related to the discovery and the study characterization of exoplanets, planets outside our own solar system, around other stars. So this is the next generation of telescope we set here in Chile, Observatory Paranal, and is composed by 4 very big telescopes. The primary mirror is more than 8 meters, and they can observe individually or also combining the light from all these 4 units together with these smaller units in a technique called interferometry, which consists of multiplying the data from every pair of telescopes and synthesize a super big telescope of approximately 130 meters. So with this, we can see a lot of details into very compact and bright objects. What we do here when we build telescopes is to push engineering, okay? When we have an idea and we propose to the engineers what we need to be able to go farther away into understanding of the universe, they don't know what to do really because there is no the technology there developed. So in the way, the engineers need to develop all this technique in order to produce super precise telescopes and instruments. And this is an example of the complexity we have at the observatory. There is a very interesting thing related to how we correct the effect of the turbulent atmosphere in our images. So we can mock images in space outside the atmosphere. And we use for that lasers that point towards the atmosphere and excite some atoms there and produce artificial stars. And with these very bright artificial stars inside the field that we are observing, we can mock an observation like if we were outside the atmosphere. And then, of course, all the instruments attached to the telescope are super complex. And I would like to highlight this gravity instrument because it has a lot to do with the very recent Nobel Prize in 2020 about the discovery of a very compact object at the center of our galaxy. This is real images, all of this taken from Paranal. It's an image from the center of our galaxy. There is, we thought there was a very compact object, and for that this team was observing with gravity the movement of the stars close to this very compact object. The way in which these stars move with time, the pattern they trace, agrees with what the general relativity predicts under the effects of a very compact object. So this is the type of observation we can do with these telescopes. It's really amazing. Another facility we are running is the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. It's located near San Pedro Atacama at 5,000 meters. And with this, what we observe is the very cold universe, the origin of galaxies, the origin of stars and planets. We don't run ourselves alone because it's super complex and very expensive project, but we are a partnership with North America and Asia in cooperation with Chile, which is, of course, the host country. And we work also in interferometric mode. We combine the signal from every pair of these 66 antennas using this supercomputer called Correlator to produce images. And again, everything here push the development of engineering, everything, the antennas, which are very high precise antennas, and also this like vehicle to transport antennas into the high side were developed for this project from scratch. We are working always with prototypes. And in this case, we don't work with instruments. We work with what we call receivers. They are these cartridges that can observe in a very wide range of frequencies to study different phenomena in astronomy. So this is a type of study we managed to do with all these telescopes, really exciting. For example, we could provide the first image of an exoplanet, okay? It was around, not even a star like us, like our star, it was around a brown dwarf. Also, we managed to detect plenty of other planets surrounding other type of stars and characterize them. We can now understand the fate of the universe also, right? And even image this black hole at the center of our galaxy. And to me, the most the nicest picture is that one, the one in the middle in the upper part, is related to planet formation. There you can see this surrounding a very young star, okay? This image was a very naive experiment we did to test one of the observing modes from ALMA. And we were expecting a dish homogeneous, this very bright. But when we processed the data, we saw this set of structures and rings and gaps. They shouldn't be there because we thought planet formation happened at the very end of the formation of stars. And this is telling us that the planets are already there forming, okay? So this simple image changed totally a scientific paradigm. And this is what we want to do with this telescope, to change science paradigms. We say we do transformational science, by the way. So what are the next steps? Okay, ALMA has been operating for 10 years, okay? I would say it's getting a bit old, although we are still providing a lot of exciting results. And we need to think on the next step, right? So the next step in this case will be to upgrade the bandwidth and the throughput of the ALMA system, basically upgrade the receivers to have a more powerful correlator and to increase the data reduction capability, all for increasing observing speed, for doing more science in less time. And I think the best way to illustrate this is through this example. This is a disk of gas surrounding a young star. And you can see in the upper side different images corresponding to different molecular species and different molecular transitions, okay? In order to get these images, we need to use two tunings. We need to observe 2 times in a specific spectral setup the same object. With this upgrade, we will manage to do in less time all these detections there. Okay, super powerful, and it will produce a lot of data. Next project of ESO is the ESO Extremely Large Telescope. Okay, we are working right now this gigantic telescope. It will have almost 14 diameter of the primary mirror. And we hope it will be finished at the end of 2028. It is located close to Paranal Observatory, like 30 kilometers away in Cerro Armazones. And it will be the most powerful telescope on Earth for many years. It's the only one of these characteristics that is being built right now and that has secure funds for doing it. It's a fully ESO project. And the cost is like 1,500 million euros. Okay, this is the complexity of the optics of this telescope. The primary mirror, the one that will have near 40 meters, is composed by different segments because, of course, we cannot maintain such a big structure into a very thin mirror, it will have almost 900 smaller mirrors that will be posed there to fulfill all this surface. And then we have 5 different reflections until we send all this light into the instruments that should be at the different sites or below the main structure. And in particular, there is a very interesting mirror called M4, where we will do adaptive optics. It's a real amazing development of engineering, this mirror. And with this, again, we can simulate or mock as if we were in the space observing, right? Because we will be able to correct all this distortion produced by the atmosphere in the images. And finally, next year, we will start the constructions of this telescope, Cherenkov telescope array. It will be built for observing high energy phenomena on the sky, but we don't observe directly these gamma rays, otherwise we could be fried directly, right? What we observe is the effect of this gamma ray when they come across the atmosphere. They excite some atoms and produce this cascade of blue light atoms, and this is what we will be able to see. So this telescope will be super sensitive on light pollution in the site. And what science do we want to do? Okay, all type of science. There is no one topic in astronomy that is not going to be affected by this next generation of telescopes. But I would say with this, especially with this ELT telescope, we would like to prove that there is life outside our solar system, okay? Why is this? Because we will have a specific instrument that will be capable to analyze the atmospheric composition on other planets similar to our Earth, surrounding other stars. And if we find one of these planets with a similar composition in terms of gas than our atmosphere, then this will be a hint on that maybe there is life in that planet. And beyond that, we would like to detect these techno-signatures, this emission of gases into the atmospheres due to industry technology, right? And we hope we will be able to do this with the ELT. Now, how the artificial intelligence will help here? Well, I would say artificial intelligence will help in many different areas when we operate telescopes and also when we do science with this data. For example, I'm not going to mention all of the different examples, I just pick up 4 of them. It will be very useful in execute the science process in an efficient way. Okay, every 6 months or every year, depending on the observatory, we receive all the proposals from astronomers and we build what we say a schedule, a long-term schedule, okay? The idea is to be able to plan properly and to optimize the use of telescope time and resources based on the needs on all these projects. In a daily basis, and based on this long-term schedule, we need to produce this short-term schedule in a dynamic way, right? Mainly produce a queue of projects with highest priority, of course, of observation based on the scientific impact, and also based on the current conditions and, well, the visibility on the sky, basically, right? The problem here is that while you are executing a project, these projects may take hours to finish, and the weather may degrade in that time. So we really need these predictions there, right? Right now, we are losing approximately 10% of the observations because of the weather degrades. And in telescopes like the ELT that will be adaptive optic assisted all the time, this percentage will be even higher. So, for example, the artificial intelligence can produce accurate forecasts of atmospheric conditions that ensure that the condition will be maintained for and hours, right? Also, it will be useful for telescope scheduling and optimization of this schedule, so we don't have to do this by hand anymore. What else? It will be super useful for predicting failures of components. Right now, what we do is that at some point during the year, we stop operations and we plan this preventive maintenance. We check all the components of the telescope, of the system, to check they are in a good shape, right? And this takes a lot of time. So if instead of preventive maintenance, we could have predictive maintenance, like machine learning algorithms for monitoring that the equipment is doing well or not, this would help to gain more time for doing scientific observations, of course. Also, an automatic way to detect faults and also an automatic way to recover the system. Okay. Related to the science archive, okay, the astronomy produces super large data sets, and the idea is that once the astronomers who propose the scientific idea get a reasonable amount of time, in the case of FISO, the policy is 1 year of proprietary time, these data are stored into a public archive. So everybody can access this data and do their own science, no matter if they were the astronomers proposing the idea or not, right? So the science archive is huge. It contains a huge amount of data, and artificial intelligence capabilities would help to make, of course, faster, more accurate, and user-friendly data retrieval, but also it would be very interesting for clustering and classification of group of data sets, for example, star types, observation wavelengths, redshifted for galaxy, etc. And well, in terms of data anomaly detections for ensuring the integrity and completeness of the data that we insert into the archive, that would help also a lot. And finally, artificial intelligence can assist astronomers into the process of processing the data and analyzing the data. The thing is that the observatories produces raw data, but in order to convert this raw data into the images for doing science, we need to do a process. We need to process the data. And this data processing can be super hard. In particular, if you think on interferometric ALMA data, the process is too long, very hard, and you can do a lot of mistakes. So if we have a level of automation and into the data calibration and into the pipelines that process all this data, this would help us a lot. We would gain a lot of time. And finally, something very interesting and that is being propagated now into many publications is the use of artificial intelligence for data analysis. Okay, this is a very wide area, but for example, if we need to analyze huge data sets that contains millions of images, and we want to detect automatically faint objects in these images, right? There is no way to do this by hand. We need these algorithms, intelligent algorithms. And also, for an automatic identification of features like, I don't know, jets, these like structures in the regions where a star forms and so on, we need artificial intelligence, okay? And this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thrilling presentation. Do we have any questions? No questions? Well, you know, they are now giving Nobel Prizes to AI, so there is an opportunity to put our faces in. Now that, you know, we had this joke that they gave the physics Nobel Prize to AI, the chemistry Nobel Prize to AI. So probably the literature Nobel Prize should go to ChatGPT, you know?
Likely.
I mean, it makes sense. And thank you. It's very interesting to see. Well, we have been exchanging with ISO for last year, actually, to like define these problems in the very particular, for the particular needs. And Inria, one of the origins of INRIA in Chile is actually the collaboration with ISO, with the ALMA Observatory in particular, and then all of this. So, and by the way, it's very interesting. I hope we have some colleagues from INRIA. I agree that like the efficient operation of all this infrastructure, well, is based on computer science, no? And AI can solve a lot of these problems like scaling, optimization, making it dynamic and all of that. Do you, is this an ongoing area of, let's say, of research that we can collaborate in this part?
Yeah, I think it's one of the first areas where we should push the collaboration a lot because it's going to be needed. Actually, I understand some observatories are already implementing some of this artificial intelligence specifically for the scheduling process because it's super complex. You need to have these quick decisions based on many parameters, right?
Yes, because if I understand correctly, you have to schedule, well, you have a priority list from let's say, the objects you want to observe, and then you probably have the people that observe this and the availability of the instruments. And so it's, okay, it's getting interesting.
Exactly. Now it's a human decision, but the parameters there to consider are huge, and the conditions on the weather change rapidly sometimes, right? So we need to control as much as we can to make the observations efficiency at the telescope. What we don't want is to lose time. And this time is lost when we observe a project into the wrong weather conditions because we will not be able to have the needed sensitivity for doing the experiment, basically.
Yes.
And this is something we cannot control while we are executing a project for an hour.
Yes, I can guess it can even get extended if, for example, if you have to do maintenance to some equipment, the list of things that you can do changes. So it's, it looks like an interesting optimization problem. We have another question over there, or one question.
Hello. Talking about weather prediction, what's the current range of, since it's a limiting factor for your astronomical observations?
Sorry, I cannot understand you well.
Sorry, again. What is the current range of limitation for weather prediction for astronomical observations? And is there an expectation for AI models to extend that range?
Yeah, I would say we are more limited by the rapid change of the atmosphere. I saw a slide where with 4 lasers, right, for doing adaptive optics. This is for correcting all these turbulence atmospheric effects that blur the image. At the end, what you see is not a point when you look at a star. You see many points there that blur the image, right? This is what we want to correct. And for that, we need a perfect atmosphere, right? So for us, is on top of this technique that we use, but we need to know when this perfect stable atmosphere will be there. And this is super difficult to predict because the meteorology is a very inspecific, let's say, science, okay? There are a lot of things to consider. We don't understand all these cycles of the atmosphere. This is what we are doing now. We are getting data, studying and predicting kind of La Niña, El Niño phenomena. So we are starting doing this now. But at some point, we need to put in a box all these different parameters that will affect to the stability of the atmosphere and predict what will happen just in the next hour. That would be enough for starting. Yeah?
I'm sorry, related to this, I don't know if do you have any more questions? I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, but is the same methodology as, you know, the weather prediction of the news? Because I guess that you are interested in the higher levels of the atmospheres, no? And it's not only like it is cloudy. Is the same weather? I don't know. Is the same prediction or a different methodology?
I mean, at the end it affects, right, to the entire Earth atmosphere, but we are monitoring very specific areas, the one above the observatories in all the different places, from Alma to La Silla. Yeah, because we also have very specific weather conditions there, very different from the rest of the world. But of course, all these phenomena worldwide affects us in some sense, yes.
Yes. No, I mean, I am in a different context. We are working in a smart agriculture project with weather predictions, and there are new models based on neural networks and these physics-informed machine learning models that are really good for micro-localized weather predictions. So maybe it's an opportunity to, like a low-hanging fruit or something that could be explored, no? I don't know if it gets you a Nobel Prize, but it's one step.
One never knows.
At least we solve a problem. Thanks. Do we have any other question? Yes? Okay. Okay. Rodrigo Vargas, I need to translate. For the scheduling of the observations, how the dynamic queue works and how AI could help optimize it in real time, adapting to the unforeseen changes in the weather conditions or the scientific priorities. He says it's an interesting optimization topic. I think it's more or less related, Rodrigo, by the way, with my question. But
doing a dynamic schedule at the telescopes is super complex. You can do it by hand, of course. Then there is no guarantee that the observation will be efficient in the sense that maybe you think you are having the conditions you need for doing the science you want, and then when you process the data, you realize your noise is twice higher, right? This is because of that. There are plenty of parameters, and they can be more and more complex depending on the complexity of the observatories. For example, at Alma, you need to consider what is the angular resolution, okay, the level of detail that the astronomer needs for doing the experiments, and it's a zoom-in telescope, right? You can have very compact configuration of the array, which will produce not that good level of details, but it's good for other type of sources, of course, or the other way around, you can extend the array to see really good details, right? So the observatory compromised to provide the needed configuration for giving you the level of detail you need. This is extremely difficult because as far as one antenna fails, this affects to this level of detail. This is one single example of the level of complexity we have, right? And we need to do this very quickly because while we're observing, maybe one antenna gets down, the other antenna gets down in the middle of the observation, and we need to take decision very, very quickly to stop the observation, to continue with another project. The same is applied to the dynamic change of the atmospheric conditions, right? We know more or less, for example, in Llano Chagnantor, that at the beginning of the very early in the morning, the atmosphere is quite stable, but as far as the sun starts going up, at some point around 11 a.m., things can degrade very fast, right? How fast can degrade? Can I start my project now? 1 hour before? Should I stop now? So this type of decisions need this level of automation, right? Yes. And these are only 2 parameters. We have like 20 parameters to consider there.
You know, for me, it's like a swimming pool full of interesting problems. Yesterday, we had this presentation, keynote from Luz, from Inria. I actually was trying to see if she was in the room. That is why I was looking over there. On bi-level optimization, and I think this is a case of multi-level optimization that you optimize, instead of optimizing everything at the same time, you make a hierarchy of decisions, no? Like the key thing I want to optimize is, I don't know, maybe, well, in the case of the configuration of the antennas, or In the case maybe of, let's say, another observatory is the people or the instrument, that how they are going to work, and then based on that, do the next level and make the next level of optimization, making sure that every decision is made optimal. So anyhow, there are many interesting topics, and it's a good conversation for the coffee that is coming up now. And yes, so we will have 20 minutes break until 11:15, and we gather back after this to continue the conversation. Thank you very much, Itziar. No, yo... ¿Estamos listos? ¿Ready? Okay, well, we are going to continue with the session with the presentation by José Galaz. José Galaz, I think, is the best way of defining the success of Franco-Chilean cooperation. No? He worked in the Catholic University and in Inria, Chile as a researcher and developer. Then he went to Inria in Montpellier with the team of Antoine Rousseau. He did his PhD there, and he's back to Chile working in CIGIDEN in the Catholic University as a young researcher. So it's you know, it's a poster boy of success of this endeavor that we are following here. So José is going to give a presentation titled "Analysis of Coupling of Methods of Coastal Wave Models," and please welcome José, and thank you very much for coming. It's your house too, so.
Okay, thank you very much, Luis, and thank you for organizing this event. Thank you for inviting me also. This is really a pleasure for me to be in this time sharing with you. And well, Luis already introduced me. I am José Galaz Mora. Right now, I'm a postdoctoral researcher working at CIGIDEN here in Santiago. Previously, I was also in Inria in France, and previously in Inria, Chile, as he said. And while I was in France, I had the pleasure to work under the mentorship of Maria Gazolia and Antoine Rousseau, two different Inria researchers from Bordeaux and Montpellier, respectively. So it was really a pleasure and a great experience to share with teams from both localities, and they helped me. Together we developed the work of my PhD thesis, which is available in the Inria Hall if you are interested, if you have questions or you want to see specific details. And today, my goal is to present to you some aspects some questions and answers that we worked on during my PhD, which I think are more transcendental than for the specific things that we were doing. Some principles I think that could be shared also especially for those of you who are thinking of doing PINs, for example, physically informed neural networks, finite neural methods, etc., etc. All right, and this project that we did was funded by the Inria Surf Challenge, where we also had the opportunity to be in touch with several other researchers from Toulouse, from Grenoble, from several places. All right, so let's start with this. Something very important, I think, especially for Chile, it is very important to notice in the world also that coastal processes, things that happened at our beaches at our coast are very important and very complex. So if we want to understand, for example, what's the impact that our structures, our ports have on the environment, and vice versa, the impact that the environment has in our structures for energy extraction, for knowing how beaches will evolve over time, how will they change, or the impact of hazardous events as tsunamis. In all of these cases, we need to know how waves propagate, and we need to know that in such a detail that it is important to have precise tools, otherwise we can't prepare properly and we face disastrous consequences. And coastal wave models, there exist many. There are many to choose from because it is really a fascinating subject that has been tackled since centuries already. And we have mainly two categories. Those are Sahli equations, which is just a set of equations, the most basic one, the oldest one, and then Business-type equations. And business-type equations are not only relevant for coastal engineering, coastal oceanography, but also they happen to have applications in plasma physics and fiber optics communications, etc. So they are really a very rich object of study. And so since we have so many of them, each one is good at different places, all right? The first idea that one has, given such a rich variety, is to couple them to make a more efficient model, all right? And we mean efficient to build something better and cheaper. So you split the regions of your domain of interest, and you assign each of those subdomains with a different model. So you get similar accuracy as if you used the best one everywhere, but at a much lower cost and much higher simplicity also. And one finds that also these regions, it is convenient sometimes to move them over time, all right? So that is what I mean by coupling them. So we use them distributed in different places on our domains, all right? And, but there is another reason, another idea that has become even more popular for motivating the coupling of these equations is to, what I exaggerate a little bit, to make the impossible possible. That means specifically to simulate wave breaking. Wave breaking is a super complex phenomenon. It's a fascinating subject of research. Even nowadays, it's a very active field and very difficult also to represent with mathematical models. But the idea here is that we have Business equations that are good at propagating waves far from the shore where there is no breaking. But when you go to near-shore areas, Business-type equations, even though they were better, they are worse at representing breaking. Whereas the Sahli equations, surprisingly, there is lots of evidence that you can use them locally to dissipate energy very much like in reality for some types of breakers. So they are kind of complementary in that sense. So in that way, you can couple them and get a very good propagation and wave breaking and inundation model very simply. So how is that coupling these equations work? Well, coupling them has been done since quite some time already. The oldest case of coupling one can find, and the simplest, is the one-way coupling. That means that, say that you want to simulate a tsunami, like in this case, in this diagram, you have your epicenter and your waves propagating that you want to represent. And the idea is that you start with one single model on a larger grid and a larger region, and then after you compute your simulations with that model, you choose a subregion inside that domain and pass the data from the original model through the boundary conditions. And that way, you can use the two models at the same time, and one model gets the data from the first model. This has been done in several simulation software for tsunamis and has brought satisfactory results. But it brings the question, how do we improve the transmission of data so that we don't miss the multidirectionality of the propagation of waves. All right? So that was an important limitation. And then we have another case of coupling, which we call the two-way coupling, where we do have communication from inner grids to outer grids. And the most popular one has been this approach called the hybrid model. In this hybrid model, I think this animation won't work. Yeah, that's okay. The idea is that you take your equation and you take advantage that what distinguishes a business-type equation from a Sahli equation is just very complex source terms. So when you detect breaking, the idea is that you simply drop all of those complicated terms and you roll back to the simpler Sahli equations. And that makes it very straightforward to code. It's a very simple because it's the best kind of fix because you don't do things. Instead of adding things, you just skip them. And surprisingly, it has been very successful. So it has had, in the first place, an exhaustive validation on a very large list of complex phenomena, like the ones listed here. And at the same time, it has received a very wide adoption, and many of the major open source community softwares that nowadays do causal wave models use this technique. It has become more or less unstandard, one can say. So now if everything is so good and it works so well, what is the problem, right? So otherwise I wouldn't be doing this presentation, all right? What is it? To put it in one word, I think this can touch, I hope this touches a nerve on everybody who has done wave models before. It is called oscillations, all right? Everything is oscillations. And some authors have said, no, this is not a problem. The oscillations are very small. We don't care about them. Others have said they could be a problem sometimes if you happen to be unlucky, let's say, simplifying things, of course. And there are other authors who have said that they are definitely a problem. Yeah, your simulation will be completely useless, regardless of what you do. Like, you cannot do that, all right? So what's going on? What do we believe in the end? Should we use the model or not? Well, the real problem, from my point of view of a PhD student at the time, is that there was no accurate explanation. Everything that was observed from experiments, from numerical experiments, and from measurements. So our criteria was not accurate enough. We didn't have the right tool for the job. So part of my PhD was taking things from the literature and creating a new tool for the job. And with that, we were able to explain most of these things. Now, to get to build that kind of tool, I draw inspiration from several places. So here I list 4 of the main of them, which I recall the most, which are heterogeneous domain decomposition methods, optimized Schwartz methods, and the theory of absorbing generating boundary conditions, including the analysis of waveform relaxation methods. If this rings a bell with you, then I would be happy to discuss how that works in particular. Now, in terms of strategy, to how to analyze these systems, to provide an explanation and say what's going on. The idea was first to split the problem from 1 into 3 sub-problems. So instead of talking about oscillations, we noticed that we should talk about 3 different issues, actually. One was mesh dependence. That means you refine your mesh and you get a different result. Instabilities. That means you run your model and these oscillations suddenly have infinite amplitude, and some oscillations that are left that are not that don't have these characteristics, these features from before. All right. So separating them on these 3 type of problems, then the next step was to simplify a little bit the problem, to isolate each of these features, all right? So the idea is that in the hybrid model, we can plot the regions, the subdomains in the space-time diagram. So, for example, we will say that recognize the Sahli model used inside this parallelogram and the busyness model used everywhere else. And this parallelogram really represents the location of the breaking wave, all right? Instead of that, we take, let's say, the top and bottom boundary, and we just study the effect that a horizontal interface has. Okay, that means a time interface where you switch models in time, and a vertical interface where you switch at every time on a specific region in space. All right? And doing that, thanks to that classification of problems, we obtain the result is that through the understanding the horizontal time interface, we can explain the mesh-dependent oscillations precisely. And through the vertical interface, we can explain these other two problems, the instabilities and the oscillations, all right? So in what is left of my presentation, I will draw some of the main results, theorems, so that you can get a taste of what these explanations are about. And as I said at the beginning, I think that many of these explanations are things that you will find directly. For example, if you use a physically informed neural network, if you put your loss function, busyness model, for example, you will probably recall the same features because they are really an intrinsic feature of the differential equation and not of the numerical method itself, all right? So, let's get in. About the horizontal time interface and the mesh dependence problem. So, to recall, the idea here in this type of coupling is that you start your computations with one model, and then you move in time, forward in time, and you continue then with the second one. So you pass the information through what we call the initial condition of the problem, okay? And here the key property to understand is the weak well-posedness of busyness type models, which is somehow encoding the effect of the non-hydrostatic pressures in the energy conservation also. Okay, so what is this about? So what is weak well-posedness? Well, for what matters, I think matters for these presentations, is just a way to say that busyness type models are not robust, in a sense, for an arbitrary data type. You have to care about the data type that you transfer, that you use to transfer information from the Sahli model to the busyness type model. All right? So more specifically, the thing is that, for example, Sahli model, you can control the size of the simulation with the same size of the initial condition in the same norm. Whereas with the busyness type models, you lose some, you need more regularity in the initial data to obtain the same regularity in the results. Okay, that's for a bit more technical for you who are interested in that part. But that is to say that you have to care about the data types of your simulation when doing these kind of things. And with that, we can have this explanation. Really, the mesh-dependent oscillations are an issue with the interaction with the weak well-posedness or busyness type systems. All right? Now, for the vertical interface, this is a bit different because now at every time you have transfer of data from one domain to the other. So here you wonder what is the right operator to do that? How do you transfer data through boundary conditions from one domain to the other? Okay? So we worked on that. We identified the right operators that we were using. And then doing that, you can reconstruct the whole solution by joining them simply at the interface. Okay? And here the strategy for the analysis was to use actually the one-way model, the one I mentioned at the beginning that we used for tsunamis, that strategy, which allowed us to identify what we called the coupling error, all right? And this part, the one-way model, tells us somehow what are the expected effects, more related to the physics of the problem. And this coupling error changes depending on this operator that we use to exchange information and brings some unexpected artifacts and other properties such as the well-postedness itself of the problem. All right? So now to tell you a bit what happens is that using the idea is that we are really interested to know about the accuracy of the model. Our golden reference is the three-dimensional model, such as the Navier-Stokes, which we know is too expensive in practice to use, but that is the target. As long as we are close to that solution, we say that the model is good, right? But instead of computing the error directly, the idea is that we can triangulate and separate the error in three components. And only one of them is the coupling error itself. And it's the only one affected by coupling conditions, and the best advantage of that is that it doesn't need any information from the 3D model to be calculated. All right? That didn't exist before. There were some notions about it, but that is something new we brought to the table. And to apply the analysis, then we studied this system, which is the hybrid model, but for this type of Boussinesq-Stambenant model, where you have to look at this equation and see that this term in red, basically we turn it on and off depending on the side of the interface, all right? So doing that, thanks to the classifications of the error, we were able to prove that actually the hybrid model is weakly well-posed, mapping data from one space into the other, and that means that it is stable. So we were able to prove it, and we have a theorem saying that, there is some sort of well-posedness in the model, so the model itself, the PDE, is stable. We cannot complain to the PDE about that. And this also means that it shouldn't be that hard for the computer. So, and in turns that means that the instabilities or these oscillations that were definitely a problem are really a problem of the computational method that one must be aware about. And finally, the last thing is that this coupling error corresponds actually to reflections on the interface. We computed their size precisely, and we were able to prove also that they are indeed asymptotically small, as long as the data also has some particular features, all right? But basically, those oscillations are expected always at the PDE level, but they are small in the end if you are in the right regimes. Okay, so that explains the three types, the third type that were not a problem, and why they were small and sometimes not so small. So, as a conclusion, I wanted to tell you that through this analysis, we were able to look at our model, something that people didn't do since the 90s, and be able to explain all of the issues that were happening. And there are other things that are other results, of course, that come on the way and also came for free, let's say, because they were necessary to do the analysis. But finally, I want to give this phrase here for a second, a friendly suggestion that even though I'm not a specialist of pins or any of those methods, but it's just that sometimes when your computational methods, your pins, let's say, don't work, check out the PDE carefully when approximating it, because you may find some answers on what's going on from the equations that you are plugging in themselves, all right? So that's my presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention, and here I leave you with my contact info if we can chat also later. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Well, before we dive into the questions, let's say a little bird told me that Antoine Rousseau is attending virtually, so I want first to say hi to Antoine, and we miss you. So, do we have any questions in the room? Paul, over there. Try now.
Yeah, it's working. Well, it's more a question about all this weak well-posedness that you've been mentioning. I wanted to have like an insight or an idea of what's going on when you do not have like such a regularity. If you have a solution that is just L2, it won't work for all cases. It's just like in some few cases, maybe it will not work. Do you know what's happening in concrete cases?
Yeah. Yeah, so what happens with wave posedness is that if you happen to have oscillations that are very short, in that scenario, very short, we're talking about very high frequencies, which are things that happen with numerical methods, right? So you have your numerical error that introduces errors of the same size as the mesh. And you transfer that data to Business models, such as this one, then this data will blow up. Not infinitely, but it will reach completely unphysical heights. So we proved that if you take the limit of the frequency, you take the limit to infinity, basically, you can reach heights as arbitrary as you want, basically. So that's because but there is a physical point of view also, which tells you that when you look at the energy conservation of Business type models, you find a component that represents the energy of the non-hydrostatic pressures. And that one depends on the derivatives of the initial data. That means it depends on the high frequency information also. So if you pass lots of high frequency data that are not part of the solution you look for, then that thing is adding energy to your system. So in the end, that energy will come up as a larger wave. So that's the intuition behind it. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. I have it here.
Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions on the hybrid method, hybrid equations. Do you switch off the source term at specific grid cells or boundaries?
If do I switch where? I didn't.
The source terms when you go from one system of equation to the other is, do you switch when there's wave breaking? So you detect the wave breaking at specific cells, or you define you switch the source terms at the boundary?
Yes. So one doesn't switch right at the point of breaking. One has to recognize a local region over which to switch. This was actually the work of Marion Tissier and other researchers, but the technique, finally, there are some criteria to define the width of such a region. And it's based on the theory of angular bores, for example, things that have been mentioned since already the book of Stokes, the classical book. So you have to take a region around the point that is detected as breaking, and you have some breaking criteria also to begin that with. So.
And is there any kind of filtering, like averaging between the two systems, or just?
There are some models that do that, but in principle, it's not necessary. Normally, they do this filtering to avoid these unexpected oscillations that happen in models, because nobody really likes these tiny oscillations. They mess with your work, basically. So one can apply filters, but these filters, sadly, they do not happen to filter all of them. For example, these oscillations that are due to reflections, they are not filtered because they are not that short. And then that's why it's really not part of the methodology itself, from what is discussed in the literature, to add a filter, even though some people do it anyway.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but we don't have time for more questions. Thank you, José. Please.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. So the next presentation is to be delivered by Maria Rodríguez-Fernandez. Maria is an associate professor at the Institute for Biological and Medical Engineering at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, and she is the principal investigator at the Millennium Institute for Intelligent Healthcare Engineering, iHealth. She has a PhD in chemical engineering from the bioprocess engineering group at IMM CSIC. I don't even know how to pronounce it in English. CSIC in Spain. And has been also a postdoc in the in the Imperial College London and the University of California in Santa Barbara. She was also, besides outside academia, a principal scientist in the pharmacokinetics, dynamic, and metabolism department at Pfizer. So today she's going to present a talk about personalized prediction of physiological and cognitive responses to high geographic altitude exposure. So thank you very much, Maria. Welcome. And
thank you. Thank you so much for the kind presentation and the invitation to come here. It's an honor to be in this scenario, and really happy to share with you all. So I'm going to present a little bit about personalized prediction of physiological and cognitive responses to high geographic altitude. But before digging into that, I would like to present you some previous results on cyber-physical systems for personalized healthcare that were also kind of the beginning of this other newer work that I'll present. So basically, we were taking into consideration different aspects. First of all, the challenges of healthcare that, as you know, the aging of the population, increases in chronic diseases, makes that we have a growing number of patients, and therefore we have an increased demand for specialized physicians, and we have less time for the visits. But this in a way creates limited accessibility to healthcare, but also we know that now patients demand a more personalized experience. They want the physician to be informed of their evolution, and they know much better also about their condition themselves. And we know that this one-size-fits-all really doesn't work, and is more one-size-fits-none. So we definitely need to personalize approaches. And also, we have to take into account the shared decision-making. It doesn't really make sense if us, as engineers, create really optimal solutions for healthcare if the patients do not agree with them, or the patients cannot really take them because they are not compatible with their lifestyle. So taking all this into account, we thought that using cyber-physical systems, medical cyber-physical systems, could help to fill some gaps in the problem. This is also allowed by the increasing number of data that we have coming from wearable devices, the impressive advances of artificial intelligence that we are all aware, and the integration of these ideas in the so-called cyber-physical systems. So based on this, we recently, actually 6 days ago, we finished this very interesting project that was an ANIDO project funded by ANID on cyber-physical systems for personalized healthcare. And in this project, we focused on diabetes and hypertension. So the idea of this project was to develop and implement different cyber-physical systems with this focus on diabetes and hypertension, in line with the concept of healthcare 4.0, etc. So we divided this project in 3 main lines. The first line that I led was focused on developing physiology-driven and data-driven models for both diabetes and blood pressure. And as you see, we developed models with very different approaches, like differential equation models and other like neural network-based models, depending on the application. And then we use these models to develop model-based optimization. So, and I'll show you a little bit more on this line later, because it was like the one that I was working on. The second line of the project was really building this cyber-physical architecture. So it was based more on like, how do we configure all these devices that have to talk to each other, and how do we configure the cyber-physical system itself, all the structure, where do we put like all the information, which kind of databases are feasible to really like get to the data in real time and to be able to process this all. And they also developed some pilot deployments. And the third line was based on the front end. It's very important that when we do these developments, we have something that is really friendly for the user, both physicians and patients, so they can really access them and they can really use them in the day-to-day. So this was based also on these collaborative systems, on some persuasive technologies, like how can I convince the patient to really follow the treatment? This is actually one of the main causes of the lack of success of some therapies, is that the patients do not really fulfill them. So how can we encourage this this follow-up? And also like a lot of work on data visualization and how can we like show the physician all this information that we are collecting from the patient. So this is kind of how we integrate these three lines. As you can see, we have here in the cloud like all the models and the data visualization. We have in the fog all the databases with the information that we have to access, and we have in the field all the devices that we are using for collecting data from the patients. So focusing more on this first line, I want to show you a couple of results that led also to the future research. So first, in terms of blood pressure, we wanted to focus on the circadian rhythm of blood pressure. As you might all know, these circadian rhythms are related to cognitive, physiologically, and behavior changes that happen into the one-day cycle. For a healthy person, the blood pressure profile looks like the one in the top, with pressure rising in the morning and dipping in the evening. So we should see at least a 10% decrease over the night rest with respect to the day mean of blood pressure. And if this dip doesn't exist, it is well known that the subject is really likely to develop hypertension in the next 5 years or so. But unfortunately, this is not something that physicians treat. They just wait for the hypertension to develop instead of like assessing first the cause of the lack of dip. So first we focused on predicting the circadian phase of the subjects with non-invasive methods. So we used some neural networks to be able to predict the circadian phase of individuals based on very simple metrics such as heart rate, body temperature, etc., instead of the gold standard that is really collecting saliva throughout 24 hours and measuring the level of melatonin. So that's really cumbersome. And if we want to know, like here, we basically want to distinguish between subjects that work really well in the morning, but not so well in the evening, the ones known as owls or larks. Maybe you are familiar with the concept. And we wanted to predict this with like very non-intrusive and non-invasive methods. So once we had that, we first have a good knowledge of how the circadian rhythm of this person works. We developed methods, this was more physiologically based methods on the circadian rhythm of blood pressure. So here we also input like some behavior, how exercise influences blood pressure, and we have like different variables taken into consideration. And once we develop these models, we can definitely use them for optimizing the hypertensive dosing time. So this is very important because there is some previous research that was saying, well, we should give the hypertensive hypertensive medication in the morning. And everybody was taking the hypertensive medication in the morning. And then you have this other paper that comes up and says, well, you know, we should give the hypertensive medication in the evening. And everybody takes the hypertensive medication in the evening. But what we discover with this approach is that it's not everybody in the morning, not everybody in the evening, but some people will benefit from taking it in the morning, some people would benefit from taking it in the evening, and some people would benefit from splitting it and taking some in the morning and some in the evening. So with this, we can definitely get the best dosing scheme for each patient. And remember that also, as I said at the beginning, this has to be like a shared decision making. So even if the model says, well, you know, you should take the medication at 4 a.m., this is maybe not feasible for the patient or is really disruptive. So how can we integrate all these into something that is really feasible and the patient can really do in his life or her life? The other the other big part of this project was based on diabetes, in particular on the artificial pancreas. So here, the main result was building models for an artificial pancreas based on IoT, Internet of Things. So basically, the artificial pancreas, or the insulin pumps that many diabetes patients use, what they do is they measure the level of glucose in your body, and they predict what's the amount of insulin they need to deliver, right, to compensate this glucose. So of course, like the commercial pumps now, they measure glucose for several hours before, and they use very simple models to predict your future glucose levels and act. So we hypothesized that if we are able to input many more variables in the model, such as physical exercise, such as what you are eating in a very precise way, we could improve these predictions. And we built these models, these deep learning based models that were taking into consideration mainly the main or the key variable here is activity, because really if you take into consideration your glucose levels but you don't really know whether you are just running a marathon or sitting on a couch, and you make the actual insulin pumps would make the same prediction for one and the other, and definitely this leads to a lot of errors. So now, with all this experience at hand, we want to move into another problem that is very appealing, that is trying to predict how your body is going to respond to high altitude. We all know that at high geographical altitude, there is a progressive decrease in partial pressure of oxygen. So this decrease in partial pressure of oxygen comes with a progressive decrease in the inspired fraction of oxygen. And what we see also is a lower oxygen concentration in our blood. But how the body is responding to these low levels depends a lot on the individual. So this is very relevant for Chile. We heard Itziar telling us about the ALMA observatory that is located at 5,000 meters, what is considered high altitude. So we're actually working in this area between the 3,000 and the 5,500 meters that is considered high altitude, where a lot of work happens in Chile. So a lot of mining companies, astronomical observatories, etc. This is also relevant not only for, or hypoxia is relevant not only for high altitude environments. It was also very popular, unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic. So the COVID also causes hypoxia, and understanding how the body responds to this hypoxia is very relevant for this context too. So you might know that under these hypoxia conditions, we can develop acute mountain sickness, and if these symptoms get worse, we can get to cerebral edema and pulmonary edema. So there are a lot of complications that come with this, but even before this happens, and this is usually happening like in really high altitude, but before this happens, a lot of other like milder changes happen. So we might see, you know, someone that has a headache, someone that maybe is not like working in optimal conditions, but we can hardly perceive that. So this adaptation depends a lot on the individuals. We see here a lot of mechanisms that I'm not going to get into detail, but basically the take-home message is that we have an autonomic regulation, and we have a chemoreflex and a baroreflex modulation that have to work in, together to really maintain homeostasis in the body. So predicting how this is going to happen for each individual is key to know how this person is really going to respond. And there are really no methods that can predict. I was later in the coffee break talking to Itziar, and she was saying, yeah, definitely we really don't know. We have this like very fit person that goes to Alma and feels super sick and he has to be lowered. And then this other person that is maybe not that fit and feels perfectly well during the whole session. So knowing who is going to respond well and who is not allows us to, well, first, maybe make a selection, but we don't even have to be that drastic. We can supplement with oxygen these people that are not going to respond well. So there are a lot of studies now, and definitely, as you see here in the last column, there are a lot of work in progress in the field of artificial intelligence, big data, and Internet of Things that can help improve these predictions. So first, going to the cardiorespiratory responses that are the most common and the most explored, we know that approximately 6% or every 1,000 meters of altitude gain lead to a 6% decrease in the VO2 max, right? That is one of the metrics for cardiovascular performance. So we know that this is an average. So on average, people experience this decrease, but we know that this is really uneven, and there's people that suffer this 6%, there's people that suffer much more, a much higher decrease. And another part that is really interesting for us and is definitely less explored is how the cognitive response is going to be for different individuals. So sometimes we just study the cardiovascular or the respiratory response, but what if this person that is working at a mining company, driving a super heavy truck, is doing well in terms of cardiorespiratory response, but his or her reaction time is really increased. Definitely, this causes a hazard and can be really dangerous. So we want to study in parallel both the cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory response and the cognitive response to hypoxia. So the objective is to predict this individual cardiorespiratory, autonomic, and cognitive aptitude to hypoxic conditions. And for that, we started an expedition to Valle Nevado. We said, well, it starts not so high. We went to Valle Nevado, that is 3,000 meters. We took all these volunteers, and we collected data from a lot of different devices. So we have CPETs, that is this maximal exercise test done at high altitude and sea level to see this change in VO2 max. We have beat-to-beat blood pressure collected at high altitude and at sea level. We collected blood glucose, we collected blood pressure, we collected heart rate, sleep scoring. We collected, of course, peripheral oxygen saturation. So you see that we have a lot of data, and definitely, like, is very appealing for artificial intelligence, but the problem is that we have very little number of patients, because we went with an expedition of 10 people that was already pretty big, but collecting 10 people per week is not that huge, and it's also very cumbersome and costly. So we have here some preliminary results, and definitely we've seen some changes, and what we did also very preliminary with this data is using some machine learning methods to predict the changes in the most relevant variables, in particular VO2 max. So here we have a pretty good prediction, but as I was mentioning, our problem now is N, the number of subjects that we can collect. So for that, we are now going with a slightly different approach, that is working with normobaric hypoxia. So normobaric hypoxia is something pretty simple that we can do in the lab. We have a hypoxia generator that looks like a small portable air conditioning unit, and with this we can really ask, please provide air similar to 4,000 meters, and we can do that in a small lab in the campus San Joaquin without a lot of problems, and then do all the tests here, both cognitive and cardiorespiratory tests. So this is the approach we are now taking. As you see also, when we do the cognitive tests, we measure EEG, we have also an FNIR system, so we are collecting a lot of data, and this procedure is going to be much more efficient for getting a large number of subjects in a shorter time. So also the next step, we are going in January to Antofagasta University, where we have collaborators that have hypobaric chambers. So we are going to compare also the normobaric hypoxia with the hypobaric hypoxia to make sure that there are not big or huge differences. And with that, our future projections is to be able to have these models that will be able to predict both cognitive and physiological performance at high altitude. So hopefully in the next meeting we can present more conclusive results. And I would like to finish thanking my sponsors, iHealth, of course, ANID through different grants, and my amazing group of students and collaborators that are the ones that do most of the work. And I'll be happy to take any question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria. Do we have any questions from the room? Anyone? Hernan? I go with.
Hi, thank you for your talk, super interesting. So regarding the first part, I would like to know, because I know that like heart rate data and blood pressure data is quite noisy, so I would like to know if you can give us more details about how did you collect the data, did you use like what type of sensors or wearables, or what was the kind of the main challenge for processing that data? And also I would like to know that, for instance, when you do a medical exam for testing your blood pressure, you usually put the machine and you have to label what activities you are doing. For instance, I mean you are having lunch or you are walking or so on. So what is the current state of the art in terms of automatic activity recognition regarding physiological measures? And for the second part is, it could be similar for trying to check whether a certain worker is having certain levels of fatigue also in their kind of label, and how would you measure that kind of thing? So in terms of going from these lab settings to a more kind of scalable way of a product or something like that. Yeah. Yeah,
thank you so much for your question. Very, very relevant. So First of all, actually, one of the main developments in this ANILLO project regarding blood pressure measurement was actually one that we did with Use Christus. And the idea was exactly that, like the automatic activity recognition, because the physicians were telling us, you know, I have this blood pressure data, and this was actually with kids. So they have this pediatric report of the blood pressure of the kid during 24 hours. They measure the blood pressure every 15 minutes, and then sometimes they see like very abnormal data, and they don't know whether it was because the kid was really having abnormal metrics, or because the kid was like running on the field, or sometimes they were saying, yeah. Then I talked to the parents. They were supposed to label every activity, but of course, people don't label every activity, or label very poorly. And, oh yeah, that they were, yeah, we were in Fantasylandia, you know. So it was impossible for the physician to really make an accurate diagnostic. And one of the developments was exactly that, super simple, just putting an accelerometer on the hand of the kid. And together with the blood pressure monitor, having the accelerometer, we could at least say, you know, how was the heart rate, how was the activity, which kind of activity we thought the kid was doing, and this was really helping. And then we put this in a very nice app where the physician could see all these metrics together, and even if we couldn't distinguish all the activities, at least we could say, here we saw some exercise, and this is maybe the reason for these high levels of blood pressure. So this is definitely very important. And the other very important thing that we are also considering is that any time that we ask people to report eating, they are all malnourished, like really. Like people don't eat, they label like 1,000 calories max per day, and we know that this is not the case. So what we did also is with also like an accelerometer with the watch, we built a model to detect eating. So now we are able to, we are actually helping the person to report. It's not like fully automatic yet, but now what we are doing is the person is having like this watch. It's actually a Pixel watch, and each time we detect eating, an alarm comes to the watch and says, it seems we are eating, can you confirm? So the person confirms that they are eating. And this is also like feeding our classifier until it's really something that we can rely on and make fully automated. But this is key in terms of reporting, because everything that we collect from sensors we kind of like trust, but self-reporting is very difficult for people. So we are trying to fill these gaps. In terms of challenges that you were asking, one of the main challenges, and it might seem like very, very obvious, but it's kind of hard, is synchronizing all the devices. Like you could say, well, everything is connected to internet, so it should be very easy to synchronize. But no, some of the devices like either are not connected, or they have different timestamps, because one is taking like the European time and the other one is taking a different time. So synchronizing all the devices and making sure that we are in the same exact time was one of the main challenges for that. And the type of devices we were using, it varies. Like for blood pressure, we were using Oscar II, that is like the one that they are using at UC Christus. That also, like the most modern blood pressure meter has Bluetooth. And that's like really like the evolution of technology, and they don't even have like an accelerometer or any other sensor for measuring activity. We were using a lot of watches from Fitbit Sense, Google Pixel. We were using a lot of heart rate bands. We were using also the Equivital system for measuring, for example, in the study that we did for predicting circadian phase, we were using Equivital that can measure the internal temperature of the body with some swallowable pills that measure temperature in the stomach. So that's kind of nice output that we could get from there. The Equivital can also measure respiratory rate and heart rate and many other things. So we have kind of a variety of sensors that we use.
Thanks. Please, really quick, because we are late.
Sorry, just a quick question. Like, I see that you are using many tools, many devices from other companies. How do you guarantee the security of the data of the patient during this process? How do you guarantee the security of the data of patients during this process?
The security of data of patients. Yes. The security.
The security, yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah, so definitely we take care of all that and we encode every subject and everything is like anonymized and everything is encoded in our databases, but it's something that definitely has to be taken with a lot of caution. I forgot to mention also like some like the glucose sensors that go to a network, the data goes to a network. So usually all the commercial devices also have a very strong regulations in terms of data processing and data storage. So we try to also be compliant on that and follow it ourselves.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. Please. Well, thank you. And the last presentation of this session is by Francisco Sahli. I don't know if I pronounce it, more or less I tried. Now correct me, please, Professor, because and I have the opportunity to. Francisco is a mechanical civil engineer and also a master in engineering from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. He received the Fulbright Conicet Scholarship, and with that he carried out his PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. And after that he was a postdoc at PUC Chile, and now he's assistant professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering, Mechanical and Metallurgical Engineering of the Institute and the Institute of Biological and Medical Engineering of all of that at the Catholic University. So thank you very much for coming, Francisco. We are going to stay, it seems, in the domain of health, but also bringing back modeling and physics-informed machine learning. So thank you. Welcome. ¿Prefieres hablar con esto?
¿Con este quizá? Okay. Is it working? Yes. Hey, thanks for the introduction and the invitation to present here. So today I'm going to talk about physics-informed neural networks, often called PINs, and how we can use them to solve a variety of inverse problems, particularly in the cardiovascular system. So why do we want to do this? Because cardiovascular diseases are one of the leading causes of death in the world. And the heart and the cardiovascular system is actually a very complicated system from an engineering perspective. So here I have some animations done, some models that we run. So here you can see in the top row how is the electrical wave is propagating in the heart, and this drives a mechanical contraction, so you can see the heart moving there. And all these electrical waves originate at the cellular level. So you can see that from left to right, we're increasing a drug concentration, so that only affects an ionic channel. And you can see that there is a drastic behavior in the mechanical response of the heart. So even if we do a change at the molecular level, it will have an impact on the overall function of the heart. So just to play this one more time, so you can see on your right that the heart is not contracting in a coherent way, so that is called an arrhythmia, and you could die if your heart is beating like that in a couple of minutes. So as Maria was saying in the previous talk, we would like to do personalized medicine, and the key idea is that we want to personalize the treatment of a patient via computational models. But the main challenge here is that most of the parameters of the model we actually cannot observe directly. So this model that I show has hundreds of parameters, but most of them, if we want to determine the values of that, we will probably have to kill the patient and do some testing ex vivo, and that defeats the purpose of medicine, right? So today I'm going to show you some inverse problems in cardiac electrophysiology and cardiac mechanics, and also in hemodynamics. So just to give a super brief introduction of physics-informed neural networks, so it is a very general approach. We can do forward problems and inverse problems. I only use it mainly for inverse problems. But the idea is that instead of parameterizing our solution of any quantity of interest with, I don't know, finite elements or finite difference, we will replace that with a neural network, a fully connected neural network that depends on the spatial coordinates of our domain. And then we will train the network to follow a data similarity term, so to fit the data that we observe for that problem, but we also have a model loss that encodes the physics. And we will train the network with these two objectives, so we will try to satisfy the measurements and also the physical model. So the first application about cardiac electrophysiology, so we want to reconstruct the conduction velocity and the fiber orientation from electrical measurements. So just a brief recap of cardiac anatomy if you're not familiar with how the heart works, especially in the part of electrophysiology. So the electrical waves originates in the top chambers of the heart called the atria, and then it goes to the ventricles, which are the lower chambers. So it follows a very specific pattern, and any disturbance from this pattern typically is called an arrhythmia. So one characteristic of the heart is that it has a fibrous structure. So, and this is, for physics, is actually very important because electrically this is the main, the electricity is conducted faster in these fibers, and also mechanically is the way that cells contract. So it's also a preferential direction for contraction. So one more thing, so currently for the ventricle there are some imaging methods that you can use to determine the orientation, but for the atria, the top chambers, there is no imaging method. So there is no way to tell how the fibers are oriented, and that's why I'm showing an ex vivo picture. So they fixated this heart and characterized the fibers, because there is no way to do that in a live patient. So we wanted to solve that issue, and to do this, we took a look at the physics of the heart and some data that we can actually acquire. So this is also an schematic. So let's say that I have an electrical wave that is originated. So when the tissue is excited, it will become red. And blue is at the resting, in the resting condition. And what a physician can do is actually to place an electrode inside the chamber and record the time at which the electrical wave arrives. So then they will move the catheter around with the electrode and try to recover multiple points. And in the end, what they want to recover is something that is called an activation map that will tell me at which time the electrical wave arrived. So here in red, it means that was where the wave originated, and in blue means the point that activated last. So in order to solve this problem with physics-informed neural networks, we consider that we have multiple activation maps, and we use one neural network per map. So let's say that we have 3 maps. And then we had a conduction velocity network that you can see below, and that one encoded the fiber orientation and the conduction velocities. So because we have direct measurements of the activation times, we use that for the data similarity term. And we have as physics, we use the Aconal equation, which has a lot of application, but it is the equation that will govern these activation times. It's also used, for example, to compute geodesics in a surface. And we also need to add some regularization because this problem is ill-posed. So just jumping into some results, here's how the network is training. So if the lines are yellow or white, that means that we have 0 degree error, and black means that we have a 90-degree error. So you can see here that the network is learning very well, and what is most impressive that you can see in the bottom, that is learning this transition of the fibers, which is almost 90 degrees, and that we know that is physiological because the mitral valve is around there and the fibers are oriented with that. So just to show you some more results, these are fibers obtained by an imaging technique of explanted hearts, and we also gave 3 different maps, and we were able to learn a smooth solution of the fibers that were acquired with this imaging technique. And we also tried this in a patient, obtaining real maps. But you can see on the top there are some maps are very, very sparse, have only a couple of hundreds of points. And then we try to predict the fibers. The problem is that we don't know what are the actual fibers because the patient is alive. But you can see some features. So we can see that the fibers are going through the roof of the atria, and also we see this 90-degree transition near the mitral ring. So that concludes the first application. The second one is in cardiac mechanics. And the goal here is to compute a strain from multi-slice magnetic resonance images. So going straight to the methodology, what we do here is very similar. So here we use another neural network that will predict the displacement of each point of the heart. But we also, this is a temporal problem, so we concatenate the time to the position in the neural network. Then we treat this as an image registration problem. So we do a standard registration where we have a target and a reference and a template image, and we try to match them through this displacement field. But we also have some knowledge about how the heart behaves as a mechanical system. So we try to encode that specifically through incompressibility, because we know that the heart tissue is mainly made out of water, so it should be relatively incompressible. So we cannot reduce its volume by loading it. So more specifically, we train with this specific loss function. The first one is an image similarity term. So that means that when we deform the image, we get a good agreement. The second one is a near incompressible hyperelastic regularization. And the last one is a backbone regularization. And if you see, we're using a very simplistic regularization. It's just a Neo-Hookean material for those of you familiar with this topic. But the important thing is that we have this term that is J minus 1 squared, and that will penalize, that will ensure that the heart behaves more or less incompressible. So here you can see some results of how we can track the images. You can see that the resolution of the images is actually very poor on this is called the long axis. But we have very good resolution across planes. So that's kind of the main challenge of these images, that the resolution in one direction is very poor, but we can track pretty accurately the left ventricle. In this case, that is the shape that you see now. So here we tested this in 15 patients. Most of the cases were quite fine, but I'm showing this picture here because this means that we are satisfying the incompressibility approximately. So most of the parts are gray, and that means that the Jacobian is 1, which means that the heart is behaving incompressibly. We also, this was a benchmark, so we compared to other methods, and we actually achieved a state-of-the-art, at least in this benchmark. We also, there's also an Inria method. Sorry, but that one didn't work very well. And we also tried Carmenis, a convolutional neural network, and it actually didn't work very well. So and also predict strains, especially in the middle of the heart. We can predict strains that we will expect clinically. So that's basically these plots show that the heart is contracting correctly. And if we look at the other regions of the heart, we actually cannot make a very good prediction, but that's mainly because some structure disappear from the images, so it's very hard to make a good prediction there. So the last topic that I wanted to show is cardiovascular hemodynamics. Here we want to estimate parameters from phase contrast magnetic resonance images. So this is our forward model. This is not the heart anymore, but it's connected to the heart, where you see gamma in. That's the outlet of the left ventricle to the aorta, and we have inside the aorta, the blood is flowing, and we have the Navier-Stokes equation for there, and then you see all these electrical circuits that actually represent the downstream flow. And this is represented with a Beam-Kessel model, that is an ordinary differential equation for each of the outlets. So typically, I mean, for Navier-Stokes, I mean, we know all the properties of blood pretty well, so we can just, we don't need to estimate any parameters there, but we need to estimate all the parameters of these electrical circuits, because that will be very patient-specific. So the way that we attempted to do this is to use a technique that is called phase contrast MRI, and this technique can measure velocities in a plane that we cut. So typically this exam takes some minutes, so we can only do a couple of slices, and that's why you see like that the measurements are actually very, very sparse. So again, we use a fully connected neural network. So here again, it depends on position and time. But one thing that is different is that we can actually satisfy one of the equations of the Navier-Stokes model automatically. So that's a continuity equation, or the conservation of mass, because we output a potential, and then we take the curve of that potential, and that will lead to a divergence-free velocity field. We also have individual networks for the Beam-Kessel models, and we also use the measurements that I showed you before, and we also use some reference pressure, that is the one that you can measure in your arm, for example. So then we try to recover all these parameters from for these electrical circuits. So here are our results. So I'm going to show you the ground truth on your left, in the middle, the physics-informed neural network, and on the right, what we will get from a finite element simulation is if we use the parameters that we inferred with pins. Okay, that should play again. So you can see that we get a reasonable solution, and I will show you some cuts now, so you can see some static images, so you can compare better. but in end diastole, in systole, when the pressure is very, very high and the velocities are high, we actually do a very good reconstruction with pins and with the finite element post-processing. I mean, you can probably tell that there are some streams going out of the aorta with physics-informed neural networks, and that's one of the challenges, that we cannot impose exactly the boundary conditions, so we're actually losing blood through those streamlines. And we're working on how to improve that to satisfy the boundary conditions exactly. But when we compare end diastole, when the pressures are much lower, so if you compare the velocities in the bottom row is only 1/10 of the top, and now a lot more complex structures form, and we actually cannot recover them that well, neither with physics-informed neural networks or with our post-processing. But we care about the parameters, and here is how the parameters are learned with this method through as we train the network. And you can see that for most of them, we arrive at some reasonable results. So my conclusion is actually very short, is that we can use physics-informed neural networks to solve a wide variety of inverse problems with the sparse data in the cardiovascular system. And here are some references of the free applications that I showed. And I would also like to acknowledge my collaborators and my funding. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Francisco. I mean, you know, there are a bunch of people working on pins here, so it's a very interesting presentation to see pins at work, working, no? Because to get them to work is frequently not trivial. So do we have any questions from the room? Hello, hello. No.
¿Aló? Sí. Quería preguntar por cómo manejan la parte práctica de las redes neuronales, como la búsqueda de hiperparámetros, estudio de ablación de los... Excuse me? Again. I wanted to ask how you handle the more practical aspects of training the neural networks. How do you do hyperparameter searches, or if you do some ablation study on all the components that you're using when you're building these models?
So, I mean, some applications, for some reason that I still cannot tell, like work very, very well out of the box. So we have kind of some standard architecture, so then we don't do too much parameter search. But of course, if it's required, we just do grid search and search for the optimal hyperparameters. What was the other part of the question?
If you do a ablation study.
So, for example, we always, at some point of the development, we try to change the activation function. We will almost always use a hyperbolic tangent. Yes. And that almost always fails. So we always go back to using tan-H, which seems to be like very universal. So I think by now we have like some pretty simple and mature architectures that work well for a wide range of parameters or problems. So typically you need to always balance the PDE term versus the data term. That is always something that you always need to tune, but that's kind of a single parameter. Yes. And I think that one key point about that is that we always take a lot of time normalizing the data and normalizing the PDE to have like a good scale for optimization. So typically we want the initial loss between like 0 and 10 or 0, or ideally 0 to 1, and then start optimizing. If your initial loss is, I don't know, like 200 or 1000, then it will probably fail the optimization.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Essentially, you're using the PIN to solve 3D Navier-Stokes equation, right, with sparse data, and it works. But how sparse can the data be to have it still working? If you have an idea of that, if you did some studies, thank you.
Yes, I think undoubtedly, I mean, we always want to show a method that is working with the least amount of data. So I think that's the minimum amount of data, the one that I showed. Because in that case, we were able to characterize very well the inlet, the blood that was entering. One part of that is very complex to learn, that is like when the aorta is bending, and also the outlet. So that data is picked very carefully. But I think if you just want to estimate flow, yeah, I would say this would still be like the bare minimum that you can acquire. So less than this, if you remove one slice, here it will probably break.
Hi, nice. Thanks for the talk. I have some questions. First, when you simulate using Navier-Stokes, do you have any instability in the process? Because I know that the Navier-Stokes equations are not well posed for any initial condition. That in the first place. And in the second place, if you research with other structures of the heart, for example, using liquid crystals?
Yeah, so to the first question, I mean, to be honest, the simulations were done by my postdoc, Jeremias Garay, and he's the expert on Navier-Stokes, so I trust him with that, but the simulations work. I know that. And I guess that you're talking to use like liquid crystals for the fiber orientation, right?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I know probably you're talking about the Barnafi's work, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have discussed on how to incorporate that because it could be used as a regularizer for the first problem that I showed when we apply it to the ventricle. So the ventricle is a much challenging problem because we have a thickness and the fibers vary transmurally. But we only have electrical data inside the heart. So it's very tricky to recover the full fiber orientation, and in that case, maybe using something like liquid crystals for regularization as a regularization term could improve the results.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I mean, we're completely out of time, but it's very hard to control time when you're having fun. So, thank you very much, Francisco. It's an amazing presentation. So, we gather back at 20:01 to continue the session, a quick lunch to keep discussing things.